2:31, Michael, if we want to go ahead and get started, we can. We have a quorum.
Great. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And Jessica, would you like to start us off with a roll call?
Yeah. Crick, who's absent today. Cronin,
Present.
DeVries,
Here.
Gentry,
Here.
Harding,
Here.
Laverne,
Here.
Stanford,
Here.
and Allison Smith in place of Ryan today.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Great. Moving on to agenda B, we have public comment. Is there anyone in person or online that would like to make public comment?
There's no one in person and no one is online to make comment today.
Great. Moving on to item C, which is the approval of the minutes from the June 3rd, 2025 meeting. Unless anyone has any comments on the minutes, I would accept a motion.
I'll move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
All right. Motion and a second. Could we have a vote?
Yeah. Would you like to do roll call or you just want to indicate by raising your hand today?
That's perfect.
Okay.
All in favor?
Lindley, since you can't raise your hand. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yep. That's unanimous.
Great. Moving on to our actual agenda items for the day. The first of which is going to be to receive the Connected Freight KC 2025 plan.
Yeah, so we'd like to introduce Devana from CDM Smith to provide you a brief presentation of some of the work we've been engaging with around the freight plan, so you can receive that today.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Devana Morade, and I'm with CDM Smith. I was project manager for the Connected KC Freight Plan. And I'll just start off with the presentation, but we're really excited about this plan and having Lawrence involved in this type of process, along with Pioneer Trails, to really get an understanding of not only what's happening in freight in the region, but really how that applies to the daily operations of these planning agencies. So I'm going to cut off my camera, turn on the presentation because I have a hard time doing both, but that's okay with everyone. Hopefully it'll let me share properly. Can y'all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
There, great. So again, this is the Connected Freight KC Plan 2050. We call it a plan in action. And again, I am Devana Moore with CDM Smith, and we were the lead for this. We also did this in conjunction with Vireo, who head up our stakeholder engagement, as well as HG, who helped us with our data and policy analysis. Got a little bit of a lag there, so there we go. So as I stated before, this was work with the Mid-America Regional Council, and they wanted to pull in the Lawrence Douglas County MPO as well as the Pioneer Trails Regional Planning Commission. So this consisted of having 19 counties in this particular area. And when you look at the study area, it was really an understanding of trying to establish the fact that freight does not have any borders, and usually what's happening in the Kansas City area is impacting the counties external to that area. And so you'll see Lawrence there in the blue and the marked counties in the yellow and the Pioneer Trails areas in the orange there. And so I would say probably the biggest challenge initially is that since these 19 counties have never done a plan or process before, there were some challenges around the data collection and the consistency with the data, not only between the two DOTs and also each planning agency and how they worked and collected data. So some information is not a one-for-one. We may have some information for Kansas is not for Missouri and so on and so forth, but we worked our best to try to align all that data as much as possible and actually really saw that as an opportunity for this coalition to grow and really find those opportunities to align the data, especially around freight activities. So the purpose for the plan was really to define the roles and responsibilities for these planning agencies in the context of the regional, state, and national freight planning. A lot of what you see with typical freight plans, of course, is around understanding the commodities, the traffic volumes, the truck volumes, And that is great information. And we do get a lot of great information from the state DOTs at that level. As a matter of fact, we were pretty fortunate that both DOTs, Kansas and Missouri, had just pretty recently had completed their freight plans in 2022, 2023. So we felt like we had a good knowledge and background on that. So we didn't feel the need to repeat the wheel on that. We could glean a lot of information from there. Our focus here was really getting an understanding of how Lawrence, Douglas, the MPO there here, and Mark and Pioneer Trails, what can they do in their processes to help integrate freight planning into their processes? How does that work for the city, municipalities where these businesses are happening and these activities are taking place, and what that looks like? And so it's really about creating and integrating a proactive planning process and supporting those goals and objectives that have also been laid out at the national and state level. So to kick off the process, what we wanted first to establish was the planning goals for this process. And this was the first establishment of really looking at harmonizing the goals and objectives between all three counties. And what we did was pull the long-range planning documents from all these planning organizations, as well as the freight plans from MoDOT and KDOT. And we were able to harmonize some planning goals, find some similarities there. And if they were dissimilar, we actually took a closer analysis of that and pulled that information in as well. And so that's why we got a lot of the environment and energy conservation. We were seeing that a couple of outliers there, but the group felt that it was important to pull that in, as well as the innovation. So I'll go a little bit to the plan content itself. I talked about the fact that we wanted to structure it a little bit differently, but we did do the work doing a lot of technical analysis. And so within the document itself, we divided it up in 3 phases, where we looked at the existing conditions, some existing analysis around first and last mile strategies and identifying farm to market routes, as well as kicking off our engagement process. And so for each task that we had technical memos that, expanded at various levels based on the information that's there. We looked at the infrastructure in terms of bottleneck analysis, which we'll get in a little bit to understanding the condition of the roads, bridges in the particular area. Also looked at some socioeconomic data information as well. We did a deep dive into the land use information that we were able to pull from all 19 counties based on information that we had to develop, and kind of merge that together to understanding exactly, more particularly with the commercial and industrial areas of particular land use, because that's where we're typically seeing the freight activity. We wanted to pull that out, and also more importantly, pull out some economic information and understanding the freight impact of this region. So there's about, I don't know, I'm going to say about 12 to 13 tech memos that go into grave detail and all this information. And so we do have those available on the site as well. And we'll show that at the end of the presentation. But the plan memo itself is a summary of all these tech memos. And we've just put that information all together. And so then the second piece of this plan is where the it's calling out to the planning agencies what we call our proactive planning framework. And one of the goals that we wanted to establish was a proactive freight planning process, where we address the critical issues, looked at the objectives of the planning objectives that were based on the planning goals. I defined those key themes that we were seeing over and over again in its interaction with freight, and also, of course, the planning recommendations. So throughout the process, it was really important that our engagement was robust, that it had a diverse group of stakeholders. And so we wanted to do our work to make sure that we did that. So here's just a list, not completely exhaustive, but a few of the stakeholder engagement that we had, including with technical groups such as yourself, KCI Airports, and also the aviation committees that consists of all the airports in the area, Smart Port KC, which is kind of the business side of establishing freight businesses and identifying those in the area. Port KC, which we're seeing there is a lot of growth within the Missouri River traffic right now, and them expanding their operations as well. More related to the area, we reached out to the Lawrence Douglas County Food Council. We attended one of their meetings, and that was a great meeting because we got to hear some different information about their perspective. Able to read that into our planning proactive recommendations there. And also a really big piece, and which was really great. I want to give a shout out to the Lawrence Economic Development Chamber of Commerce. They were really supportive in a lot of the work that we did and hosted a couple of meetings for us. And so a great catalyst for getting some great feedback and understanding exactly what's happening in the Douglas County area and what that means. Oh, why's my internet? Okay. Oh. So an anchored piece of that talked about this robust engagement. We held scenario workshops that were held in each one of the areas in KC, Sedalia, and Lawrence. And it was really to understand the tools that are available to these planning agencies. We know can sometimes be limiting, but but really understanding how we can apply that to the issues of freight in the freight situations. And so these scenario workshops were based around that. And we in each three scenario workshops that we had, we would say different key themes came up. I think with Kansas City was really around land use and planning. Sedalia was heavily, the issues that kind of bubbled up to the top was around the workforce. And then with Lawrence, it was a lot around the economic development and opportunities there that we saw. And so to give an overview of those scenarios, we of course had our baseline. We have what we call the Wild Wild West, which refers to unchecked economic development, so pretty much anything that can happen. And at the time we created these scenarios, and which was partly created from that came from the brain, the Good Women Committee of the Mid-America Regional Council. Wild Wild West was kind of a thing where, anything could happen. And it was about a year or so ago when we did this. But at the time we were starting to roll out these scenarios, we found ourselves actually being actually in that Wild Wild West scenario. So it seemed a little bit more relevant to what we were doing. So we had to make some shifts and changes to that description as well. We also have what we call shifting patterns, which is kind of things are happening. Another pandemic had happened. What is happening with what we call the Amazon effect as e-commerce is starting to grow. Looking at just-in-time delivery and such as that. And then also what we call the Show Me, which really emphasizes regional freight growth throughout through initiatives that will leverage the Kansas City geographic regional area, almost as if to say that regardless of what's happening in the world, like with the tariffs and everything else, how can this region leverage what's happening in the region to keep themselves going because of where we are, and we are such a desirable location. What can we do to continue to leverage ourselves to be viable throughout these changes that are taking place? And so this is just a snapshot of some of the tools that we use. We use the proactive planning kit. I talked about the tools that would be that were applied to these freight scenarios, and those are there that are highlighted in red. And what we asked them to do was use kind of scale out exactly what those how those tools on a scale maybe 1 to 5, how they can be applied to these scenarios and how effective they would be. And so when you look at the planning document, you will see the summarization of that and what each one of the scenario workshops came out with. So it was a great way to get some great feedback and engagement, but also tell us exactly what could be helpful and give the planning agencies an idea of how they can move forward and being proactive with the freight planning in their area. Next, I'll go a little bit of the infrastructure assessment. Again, the plan goes into more detail, but this is just overall network map of the multimodal network itself. Also identifies some truck parking locations, airports, ports, identifying those locations. There are critical urban and freight corridor routes, as well as our highway freight system and primary freight system as well. That's highlighted there in the purple. So that just gives you kind of this freight network map there. I talked before about land use, and we dived into that information around the industrial property clusters as well as the commercials as well. And so using that information together, we can bind that all together, and you will see here in the more intense red or orange or red colors, you will see a lot more land use in terms of industrial clusters and regional information. And this was helpful to us to help us understand exactly typically where these freight activities are taking place, where they are in overland that with the current infrastructure of the railway network and also the other freight facilities identified. Excuse me. We also looked at freight truck average daily traffic. This is actually the current map, and we're seeing just where we're seeing a lot of freight traffic, of course, going out through I-70 through here, where we're getting some very intense spread, and then out and going out towards the west, we're still seeing some volumes picking up there along the I-70 routes there. When you overlay that with truck percentages, and this is like, what is the percentage of the traffic that is truck? You'll see some more intense red out there towards the Lawrence area there in terms of truck percentages as a part of the overall traffic. And I guess that's no surprise. Anybody that's out on the highway, we're seeing a lot more trucks, more and more. And this information is just reflective of that. And also you're seeing that more on not so much, a little bit in the inner core there, but I think as we're getting more to the outer areas, we're seeing a lot more intensity and not so much in the inside, but as we're moving out, we're still seeing some pretty significant congestion out there we hadn't seen before. And this is just in the future, looking at bottleneck analysis, this was a horizon out to 2050. So this is just a snapshot of AM and PM bottlenecks. And this is basically a bottleneck analysis for freight where we're having congestion, freight delay. And this is really related to travel time reliability and predictability and understanding exactly where we're seeing these bottlenecks when it comes to freight on these particular areas. And this is kind of an indicator and understanding exactly if there's an opportunity there for infrastructure improvements, operational improvements. So again, when we dive into land use, we in talking with the planning agencies, it seemed to be really important to understand exactly how land use decisions are made and how that applies to freight and what that cross section looks like. And so one of the outcomes that came for that is that we created a kind of a checklist, a guide for local planning, freight planning, and I really focused on transportation infrastructure, considering those factors for the current and the future, safety considerations, understanding accessibility and connectivity, and also siting of some of these freight activities. Also looking at other things such as service infrastructure, you're talking about utilities, water, and environmental considerations as well, and then some offsite impacts and economic developments become the categories for there. And so the plan does dive into that. And then we did create what we call a little checklist. We call it the what to expect when expecting freight. I think sometimes in the land use world, we look a lot at, some traffic impacts and understanding that. But when you're thinking about, for example, what's happened right now with for instance, the Panasonic facility, it's a lot of unintended consequences that happen out of that. And that tends to happen when any site, but having a better understanding of what could happen, going through this list, I think helps inform local municipalities exactly what is coming up for them. And then also giving understanding how they can protect their roadway network and also their freight network and understanding how they can impact each other, both, positively and negative, and where we can separate those land uses, where we can have opportunities for collaboration, thinking about the workforce in those particular areas and things they may need as workers there, so they don't feel isolated. That is just, looking at a particular area. Are we thinking about the livability of those workers that are there? Is there opportunities there? Do they have daycare nearby? Do they have services nearby? Can they go to the grocery store right after they get off work? And thinking about all those types of things based on that. So it's really about creating the opportunity to grow and think about the livability aspect of these areas, which is kind of a newish concept that we're diving into. And I think there's opportunities there to look at that as markets developing and restructuring their committees with there's planning sustainable places and that committee, and understanding how that interacts with freight and how we can also pull in that information through Lawrence and Pioneer Trails to create this greater aspect of understanding of livability and freight freight activity within these areas. So one of the things we done in combination with that, we identified the freight activity centers, and this was done really, we used some information. We use a software called GeoTab, and we were able to break down these zones for that. Excuse me. And they were used because they provide reliability of the freight activity centers and truck-based freight origin destination patterns for the area. We used some larger geotab zones that were broken down. So it was actually about 121 of these freight activity zones that were created and that you see there in the white. And then the purple area represents the industrial land uses that are there. So we were able to create these zones, but this kind of breaks it down more intensely. We highlighted those, that is about 37 of them on this map that we highlighted that had a little bit more intense activity to help identify these locations and where they are. And so it shows the distribution of industrial land use across the area. To get specific into the information, the top 37 freight activity centers contain about 90,000 acres of industrial land uses and about a little over 200 million square feet of warehousing distributed related to rentable building area, and about 70 million square feet of manufacturing food processing, just to get some statistics around that and understanding that. And then I was able to very roughly kind of pull out the Lawrence area, what we're seeing there. And so those areas highlighted with the wider or more intense freight activity areas there. And so then we were able to take that information and we overlaid this with our multimodal freight network and giving an idea exactly of the freight activity, major freight access. And so where you saw before in the purple, we've changed that to an intense level of green there. And the level of green represents the number of modes that are connected to those freight activity centers there. So it's again thinking about that multimodal effect. We had a lot of discussions and questions about mode distribution and share. You'll see here shortly that there's a lot of tonnage on the truck side. Is there opportunity to grow that more on the rail side or the port side? And so this just gives a good overview of where these freight activities intersect with the modal network there. So go a little bit to the economic overview. Again, we leaned a lot on information from KDOT and MoDOT on the getting some information there. So we pulled this information around the tonnage and value by mode. So again, I talked about the modal split by tons and then by value. You see that truck does carry a lot in the Kansas area and have a little bit about pipeline, and then the multiple modes and mail that is actually centered around delivery is where that's coming from. Kind of questions about that. And this is what Missouri is. A little less on the tonnage for the truck, but the value is about the same. So then in Missouri also, we looked at Missouri freight generating industries where wholesale was is the leader, and it's about 35% employees of the top 74% of all industries in Missouri. So again, there is a strong connection with freight industries in Missouri, and the same is to be said for Kansas as well. Kansas has about over 50,000 plus freight reliant industry establishments and a little over 500,000 total employees, and that was as of 2019. And in Kansas, the freight reliant industries contributed about 40% of the state's GDP, which amounted to about $72 billion. So again, we wanted to capture like the idea around workforce. We did do a workforce tech memo that you could definitely dive into in that, but we just captured a shot again of what we're seeing for the future in terms of population growth, employment growth, and the opportunities there where we're seeing supply chain jobs expected over the next few years within this area. So again, I've talked a lot about the proactive planning framework, and then, so that first part was really around the tech memos and all the information you'll see there. So this part here is around the proactive planning framework, which is the second part of the plan that's focused really on planning recommendations. And so again, I talked about the critical factors of this plan, and this was decided early on by each three agencies about exactly what they wanted this plan to do. They wanted to balance the representation of freight needs and policies and priorities, harmonize those freight policies again, which was started around with the planning and objectives that we did at the very beginning, providing resources to educate local governments on the expected impacts of freight, hence to what to expect when expecting freight, kind of checklist, those types of things there, and develop policies that are reflective of Kansas City's geographic advantages, leaning back on what we talked about with the show me scenario and leveraging Kansas City's regional area and its geographic advantages and why businesses are attracted to here, and making sure we have policies that help to support those moves that are taking place while also protecting our environment and creating livable spaces for everyone, for the jobs, workers, and everything that's attached to that. And leaning more into that, and when we looked at the proactive planning itself, these are the four things that we wanted to be established, creating this partnership between these three groups. We didn't want this plan just to sit on the shelf. We wanted the opportunity to create a coalition between these three agencies that are experiencing this freight impact in various ways. And one thing, and understanding that these things are all connected together, and what happens in one area is going to impact the other area as well. Establish this proactive planning process, and that's exactly what this plan is doing. In developing in the planning recommendations and the work that we've done and moving forward with that. Preserve and improve the multimodal freight network, and then convey the economic resilience to the freight industry success, meaning that we are really trying to explain the picture that if freight is doing well in this area, we are economically doing well in this region. And they are very much tied together. And that was the key piece of understanding the economic impact and overview in jobs and workforce and where we're headed. We developed key themes around proactive planning and how it interacts with all these things here in this circle wheel: economics, leveraging resources, infrastructure, everything that you guys are dealing with on a daily basis. What does that mean for freight? And that's just how we were able to build up a proactive innovation process, because we want this plan to keep going, to be ongoing and iterative. It's not meant to sit on the shelf. We are really establishing a place and moving forward with ideas that will help us leverage how we're going to move resources in the future, opportunities for funding in the future, considering the environments and understanding all these things together helps us pull that together. So having these key themes and thoughts helped us shape exactly what the planning recommendations will look like to help us categorize that a little bit better, to be clear for each one of the agencies. So the recommendation elements itself consisted of those key things, which is the circle I just showed, the planning objectives, and then also those critical factors. All those three things we just reviewed together, pulling all that information together through the center here, is the heart of how we developed our planning recommendations. And I won't go through them all, but in the plan, as you'll see it as an example, you will see how we've identified the critical issues, which we gave numbers, as I did on the slide there, because it was a lot of words. We wanted to keep it as clean as possible. We have our critical issues that these address, the proactive planning objectives, and the planning recommendations. So you'll recognize this from the previous slide. And the key theme here from the circle here, this is based on economic impacts. And so, for example, it's for economic impacts, it was important to leverage the relationship between these three groups, because I said before, there's opportunities there for jobs, funding, grants, everything that can pull in more opportunities there, and then conveying that economic resilience of freight industry. And then from there, we were able to develop our specific planning recommendations. So for each one of those key themes listed here, and I'll go back a little bit just as a reminder, each one of these key themes here has a set of planning recommendations based on all that criteria together. And that's how we were able to pull all that information together. And I do believe that completes my presentation. We do have, if you have any questions, but I will say, I'll skip right here. To get tomorrow, the more information, all this information is just just been posted to the plan website, where you can see the summary of the tech memos, our report document, and also the proactive planning framework, as well as all the tech memos and also the appendices, which include some of the information from the scenario workshops. You can dive in deeper into those planning toolkits and the descriptions of the base of all the scenarios, and also that what to expect when inspecting freight land use checklist as well is there also. And that concludes my presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you for the presentation. Sounds like you guys are doing some great work.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 2, we have core document amendments in response to the new USDOT guidance.
Thank you. We have included for your review, our memo that we plan to share with the MPO policy board. In response, it shows the letter and the requests that we have received based on USDOT guidance from our state and federal partners. So what we've included there in the memo is the draft markups with requested changes that have been provided via KDOT, and we're going to be seeking guidance from the MPO policy board to advise staff whether or not the MPO policy board recommends that the MPO documents be revised in accordance with the guidance that we have received from our state and federal partners. So we're sharing this memo with you today, but we will be putting it in front of the MPO policy board for their consideration on the 17th.
So do you need any action from us today, or is this more of a notice?
Nope, as staff, we're not looking for an action for you today. If you have additional questions, you're welcome to follow up with us or follow the conversation with MPO policy board to understand what advice we get from them. And that will inform any future action that staff will take in this regard. But we just wanted to share this with you to let you know that we will be sharing this additional detail in these markups with policy board to seek their advice.
Great. Thank you for letting us know. So moving on from that, we have the last agenda item, which is the 2026 Unified Planning Work Program Planning discussion.
Yes, thank you. So at the end, nearest the end of every summer, MPO staff take the opportunity to work with the Technical Advisory Committee to begin a conversation about what the 2026 Unified Planning Work Program might look like. I have prepared this chart to kind of lay out and show you as an example. There's multiple years, and I started this obviously in 2024 why you see the green column there. But this really shows the magnitude of the MPO work with each plan kind of listed in column A. If it has an acronym it goes by, and a documentation in column C about when it was last adopted. And then if it has a requirement kind of about the timeline for when it needs to be revised or updated. And I've kind of shown across the years when you might expect to see what type of workload that we have on our radar, just to begin this conversation, to kind of maintain all of our plans in a current active status, to make sure that they have a regular update and opportunity for meaningful participation. And so to kind of kick off the conversation, I think we could look through the 2026 list of what we have on our radar, and we're not committed to anything yet. Of course, we're going to draft a unified planning work program to bring back to you for your consideration and for public comment, and then a final MPO policy board decision making. But this kind of gives you an idea of, based on our timelines, what we are looking to lay out in that year. The black boxes are things that we've kind of either started confirmed dates or have required dates in them. And then gray box, the little big box where there's a box, but it's empty without kind of individual cell walls. Those are areas where I'm thinking like that's where we should be doing it, and we'll need to go check back in, I think, with the jurisdictions in those specific spaces to see, like, are we needing a plan update? What's the magnitude and scope of an update, to be able to kind of better understand how long it might take us to do that work. But let me go through 2026, and then I'd be happy to entertain a conversation about any other requests that people might have for work they would like us to consider. Of course, we'll be looking at building a robust program within the capacity of the MPO Consolidated Planning Grant budget. Of course, we have an annual UPWP. In 2026, it'll be time for a new transportation improvement program, unlike that we did last year, but this year we've just been updating. We will, towards the end of 2026, be embarking on the beginning processes of an update to Transportation 2050. That is typically a year and a half long process, 15 to 18 months. So that'll be a time frame we'll be looking at towards the end of 26. Typically, before we do that long range planning update, we would look at Title VI, LEP, public participation plans. From the memo we saw, we've received advice that the LEP is going to be no longer required. And so I put an asterisk there because while we won't have to have a standalone plan with federally required components, we anticipate maybe being able to roll some of those things in regards to how we'll interact with non-English speaking peoples as part of our public participation plan and combine those. We will hope to be finishing up some minor updates to our ITS plan. And then finishing up the Safe Routes to School plan. And then we kind of have in this work phase of kind of the boxes, depending on what we get started later this year and or what needs to be done next year, considerations for both Lawrence pedestrian plan, a countywide bikeway plan, and Eudora and Baldwin City Safe Routes to School plans. So depending on how much of those get started. We have some recognition that there's some policy development work that needs to happen as a result of Vision Zero implementation across all of our cities that participated in that planning process. So whether that looks like updates or establishment of complete streets policies or other type of policy work, and some new dashboard implementation in that space. Of course, we're looking at also our annual work around Safe Routes to School. I don't have specific action on this list related to performance measures or our annual processes related to establishing targets for any of those, but those would be also something else that we would need to consider to stay in compliance. I'd be happy to entertain conversation about any of those things or other things that might be on people's radar that we should consider for next year.
What dollar value to use as an estimate?
Do you have one for me? Otherwise, I was going to use the one you gave me for this year.
Yeah, on your CBG agreement you guys just signed, there's the
Yes.
chart.
Okay.
I would use the allocation amount. The other amount that's written into there was adjusted because
Right.
of that goof. So
Okay.
don't use that number, but use the column that says 2025 final allocation or something.
Okay.
That's going to be your best number. Typically PL and 5303 go up a little bit each year a bill. Hard to say how much. So I'd rather you guys be conservative and add a little bit more money on into next year than have to cut it. So
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
But other than that, KDOT doesn't really have any other like requirements or, changes or anything that I'm aware of.
Jessica, would you consider under that Vision Zero line, if this city got Vision Zero Safety Implementation Grant, the MPO being part of that for the work plan?
Yeah,
Under that.
Yeah, I would assume pending the City of Lawrence award for supplemental planning and demonstration on Vision Zero, that there would be MPO involvement in the planning parts of that work. Of course, that's contingent on that funding, so.
And are you asking for other possible projects or policies or things to add to that at this time, or just?
Yeah, I think this is the
To think
list.
about.
If there's stuff you want us to consider, this is the time in which we do that, to be able to, as a group, talk about what other things might be before the region that would need MPO staff time or involvement. The caveat to that a little bit, Dave, is that we recognize in the budget process that the MPO staff also has a separate some hours of their time allocated to local transportation planning. You know, that this year it looks like 3 of our staff, and we each have 5 hours a week for local planning. So I'm not talking about the locally prioritized stuff in that space, but I would be talking about anything that would be MPO eligible and want to be considered as part of the work plan for the hours that are MPO hours that are billed to the grant, that this is the time to discuss the specifically listed work in that space. And at this time, we don't have, we're using our fund balance to pay our carryover to pay our full amount of our staffing in this space. And so we don't have additional resources, like if we wouldn't be pursuing consulting opportunities, but this would be for in-house staff planning work.
Does anyone else have any additions or comments or questions about it?
If you think of something in the meantime, we will be drafting a plan. It's something that we can always consider and evaluate to bring back to this group as part of a plan, or if there's trade-offs, and we can ask those questions in this space. So I'm happy to do that. So please reach out if there's something within your region or area or corridor or something else that you think needs any additional time or energy. We would be happy to have those conversations about what that might look like with you.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Looks like that was our last agenda item for the day, and now we're on to quick updates, which is for the Lawrence Bikes plan.
Yeah, thank you. We have just included the link to our project website for the Lawrence Bikes plan. That work is moving along. And so we just want to keep you informed and provide you access to the link for that project.
Awesome. Looks like that will conclude the meeting for today. So our next meeting is set right now for August 5th, 2025. So see you all then.
We'll plan to see you there with the tip amendment.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.